Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Audi's smallest model, the A1, in this second generation guise, has been around since the summer of 2018 and it hasn't received a facelift since then. So I'm guessing that's going to happen early next year in 2023. And then unfortunately, rumour has it that by about 2026, Audi are going to phase out this car and this model altogether. As with all new cars, the price of the A1 has gone up over those past 4 years, but I'm happy to say that the base model A1 25 TFSI in Technique trim retails at just under £20,000. I believe it's £19,700. And for that, you get a 1 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged engine producing 90 horsepower and 175 newton meters of torque. Doesn't sound like much, but you've got to remember that these weigh about 1,200 kilos, so a lot lighter than, let's say, the A3 or even a Golf. But this particular press car is the top spec black edition trim. It's also a 30 TFSI, so it has a bit more power and a bit more torque, which we'll go into shortly. And it has the 7-speed S-tronic gearbox. All of that bringing this particular press car's on the road retail price up to £31,500. In terms of styling, well, I've always been a fan of the A1 in first generation, especially the flagship S1 that never made it into the second generation. And this particular press car in top spec black edition trim looks really good. We've got 18-inch wheels all round. We've got the two-tone exterior colour, so we have black roof and Misano red paintwork everywhere else. Both of those are options, which we'll go into once we jump inside the car. But I just think the A1 looks unmistakably like an Audi and has similar styling cues to the rest of the lineup, which is really, really important. Now under here we have the same 1 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged engine that's in that base level Technique we talked about earlier on, except this one has a little bit more power and torque, so 110 horsepower and 200 newton meters of torque. It's hardly going to set the world on fire in terms of performance. In fact, Audi claim this car does the 0 to 62 sprint in 10.6 seconds. I've not seen a manufacturer claim a 0 to 62 time over 10 seconds in a long time, but thankfully it doesn't feel that slow in reality, and we will test that figure shortly because I believe that it's definitely under 10 seconds. But of course the flip side of having such a small engine in something that's relatively lightweight by modern standards anyway is that this car is reasonably frugal. Audi claim that it will do 47 miles to the gallon on the combined cycle, and I found that to be more or less accurate. If you did want a bit more punch, then you can get the 35 TFSI, which retails at about £1,000 more, and that gives you a 1.5 litre 4-cylinder turbocharged unit producing 150 horsepower and 250 newton meters of torque. And from what I can see, it doesn't weigh any more. And that particular car has a claimed 0 to 62 figure of 7.7 seconds, so far more in line with what we're used to these days. Let's jump inside and have a look at the interior and then go through some of the options and packages that are fitted to this particular press car. Jumping inside, and that Audi familiarity continues. It feels very similar to the current A3, which isn't a bad thing, especially when you consider that this interior is approaching 4.5 years old. This is a key, and if you press that button, well, that pops out, and apparently if you put it in here, put your foot on the brake, it starts the car. That's something I haven't seen for a while, but actually, jokes aside, I really, really like it. And that old car retro feel continues, because if you look down here, well, we've got a traditional handbrake, which once again I really, really like. And even the gear selector, well, in the A3 and even in cars like the 3 Series LCI from BMW, we're left with these funny little tabs to change gear. Cost cutting, I'm sure, does free up a bit of space, but this car being a few years old now, well, we've got a proper gear selector down here, which once again kind of adds to the feel of this car. You get in here, you use a key, you use the gear selector, you release the handbrake. I really enjoy all of that, and I'm sure when they do update this car, a lot of those features will disappear. The quality of materials are all very nice. This particular car has a flat bottom wheel, which is exactly the same wheel that you find in other models in Audi's lineup, as far as I can tell anyway. The top of the dash, well, it's a bit of a soft touch material. It's all not too bad. The only bits that I'd point out that I'm not overly excited about are the top of the door cards. That is really cheap and pretty nasty plastic, which you would normally find lower down on, let's say, an A3 or models that are higher up in Audi's structure. But that is, yeah, it's not really acceptable on a 30 grand A1. But everything else in here is up to a decent standard. We'll go through the options now, in fact. So this particular car has the Misano red paintwork, which we talked about. That's £600. We have the Comfort and Sound Pack, which consists of the Sonos sound system, which is really, really good. In fact, I've been using the sound system in this car a lot more than I normally would, because the engine is so quiet, which we'll get to once we get out on the road. But that's a really nice sound system. So if you're looking at decent music in your A1, it's worth going for, because it's 1150 quid. That does consist of a couple of extra options which you can check out on the configurator. It also has the Plus Pack, which I believe is the two-tone exterior, which we did talk about when we're looking at the styling. So the black roof, that's 450 quid. And then last but not least, it has the technology pack, which is £1,550. That consists of things like the upgraded MMI infotainment system and Audi's virtual cockpit. And all of those options and packages bring this car up to £31,500, as we talked about on the outside, which is a lot of money. In fact, there can't be many cars out there that have only got 110 horsepower and retail at over £30,000. I would love to hear in the comments below if there are many, but this must be right up there. But once again, don't disappear yet, because you can't read too much into those figures. There's a lot more to this car than just reasonably slow acceleration times. First thing to do is test out this car's claimed acceleration figures. They're not big or punchy claims. Remember, 0 to 62 in 10.6 seconds. So let's see if we can get under 10 seconds to 60 miles an hour. My Racebox Mini is ready to go. My left foot is hard down on the brake. We're in sports, automatic and dynamic. I'm going to floor the accelerator, let it stall up a little bit and see how we go. Then we'll do it again and turn all the traction off. It is a little bit greasy and slippery out there, but I don't think we're going to be spinning up the front axle much. It's front wheel drive, this car, because it just doesn't have the power to torque. But let's see, I might be wrong. Left foot hard down, right foot on the accelerator. That's about all the stall we're going to get by the looks of things. And here we go. Oh wow, that's initially really slow off the line. 40. Okay. Well, I've never had to use so much of that section of road to get to 60 miles an hour before. I actually thought we were going to run out of road. We did it in 9.77, so it did just dip below the 10 seconds, but that initial getaway was really slow. So let's see if we can get around that by maybe putting it in manual and turning all the traction control devices off. Okay, here we go again. This time I've got all of the stability and traction control switched off, which, as I said, I don't think it's going to make a massive amount of difference. But we are going to use the paddles and manual gears, and I'm not going to hold it on the brake, because I think when you're on the brake, this car's electronics don't let the engine sort of stall up. So I'm just literally going to go accelerator like you would off the lights, but I'm going to hold it on the handbrake to stop it creeping forward, like so. So when I come off the brake, it shouldn't creep forward. And then ready, steady, go. Oh, feels a bit better. Change a little bit early because it has lovely mid-range torque, this car. Definitely feels a little bit quicker, and it is 9.28 seconds. So no slip whatsoever. The traction control didn't make any difference, because when it was turned on, I didn't see the traction light come on, and when it was turned off, we didn't get any slip. But an initial getaway or launch in this car is actually quicker, just basically nailing the accelerator rather than holding it on the brakes and building up the revs, because it won't allow you to build up the revs. 9.28, 60 miles an hour, that's not too shabby. It certainly looks a lot better than the claimed 10.6 to 62 miles an hour. Right, let's get it out on the road and talk about what this car's been like to live with for the past week. I'm very fortunate because I get to drive a lot of expensive and exotic machinery throughout the year, but I love going back to cars like this A1 that is relatively affordable in this day and age, especially for something that has an Audi badge on it. And just like the A1 I tried back in 2019, well, I've really enjoyed every single minute of running this car. You see, it's not pretending or trying to be anything that it isn't. It's not labelled up as a hot hatch, and therefore when I jump in here, I don't have massively high expectations. And it does, being a car, really, really well. Its driving position is okay. It's no better or no worse than the rest of Audi's lineup. Remember, I'm 6'4" and I've got a very long torso, so I do struggle in a lot of cars, but considering this is so small on the outside, it's relatively big on the inside. You wouldn't want to put anyone bigger than a medium-sized adult in the back, and probably really only kids. And it's quite dark back there, windows are quite small, and all this black interior and black headlining doesn't help. But you would get two teenagers back there and two large adults in the front, and the boot, it's a usable space, it's not too bad. And obviously you've got fold down rear seats. We've already talked about the actual interior quality and cabin fit and finish. Well, on the whole, it's not too bad at all. And I love the fact that down here on the climate controls, well, we have dials to control the temperature, we have buttons where the seat heating is, etc. It's not all touchscreen, but I fear that the facelifted version will probably remove some of those physical buttons. Its ride quality is actually pretty good, especially considering we're on those 18-inch wheels with reasonably low profile tyres. Talking of tyres, we're on Goodyear's asymmetric 3s, which I think are a couple of years old now. They seem to do a reasonable job, but they do produce a lot of tyre roar, and I'm not sure if that's all down to the tyres, but that's a big significant difference between the A1 and the A3, is the amount of tyre roar that comes into the cabin. So there's less insulating going on, etc. And yeah, it just gets a little bit loud in here on longer motorway jaunts where the surface isn't perfect. Something you really can't hear in here is engine sound. Even when you floor it and the gearbox kicks down, it's a real struggle to hear that engine note from the 1 litre 3-cylinder turbocharged engine. That's a shame, because I personally love the sound of a 3-pot. They always sound like a watered down version of a Porsche's flat 6, but this one That's 5,000 RPM, 6,000. I don't know if the mic's even picking it up. It's quite bizarre. It's almost EV-like. And the first couple of days in this car, it really did take some getting used to. You have to look down just to see sort of what gear you're in, because you've got no idea. And the gearbox does a very good job of getting through the gears very quickly. If you leave it in auto or individual or normal, as you accelerate out of a junction, it will be in 5th gear by the time you're at 30, 35 miles an hour, which is very good for the efficiency. But it does sometimes catch you out, and we'll talk about that in a second. As with when we tested out its launch control, that initial getaway, well, there's not really much there. It takes a while for the turbo to spool up, and because there's not much engine there, you really rely on that turbo. So sometimes you can be caught out in 7th gear like we are now, just under 50 miles an hour. If you add a bit of throttle, nothing really happens. It has to change down a gear or two before you start making some progress. But what this engine lacks in outright power and, let's say, low down response, it makes up for in mid-range punch. It's got a lovely torquey mid-range. Reach down here to drive select and cycle through to dynamic, then goes into sports automatic. But if I push this rather large and old school gear selector over to the left, it then gives me manual or paddles. Got these little plastic tabs at the back of the wheel, which aren't the nicest feeling sort of gear selectors, but they're actually the same ones that we used to find in the R8 rear wheel drive or rear wheel series, as it was known before that. So they're not offensive, but I wish they were alloy or something a bit nicer than plastic. But when you use the manual function and you mate it to this engine, it actually all starts to make a lot more sense. And this car feels way quicker than the 110 horsepower and 200 newton meters of torque suggests. You see, that torque is sort of available between about 2,000 and 4,000 RPM, give or take, and that's where this car is at its quickest. It feels just night and day faster than when we were testing its acceleration figures. It really does, and as long as you keep it in that sweet spot, we're in 4th now, 3,500 RPM, and it's just pulling so nicely. It has a lovely slug of torque, and that translates to good efficiency on longer runs, because on the motorway it sits there in 7th gear quite happily, I think about 2,500 RPM. And yeah, like I said, it feels way quicker and way more powerful than the figures on paper suggest. Now, I've thought about this for a couple of days and realised that actually, if you look at something like an RS3, it's 400 horsepower and 500 newton meters of torque. Torque figure is always about 20% higher in numbers when you're using horsepower and newton meters on most cars. M3 and M4, 510 horsepower, 650 newton meters of torque. Okay, maybe that's 25 or 30% more. But this car, 110 horsepower and 200 newton meters of torque. That's nearly twice in terms of numbers. And that's why this car feels like it has so much torque but not much power, and they're two very different things. And I think, I believe, that torque is the most important figure for your daily car. It's what we use most of the time. We're not wringing most cars' necks. Okay, hot hatches and sports cars, you do tend to take them up in the rev range, but for something you use for daily stuff, we're in 3rd now at 2,000 RPM, and it actually really pulls. That's 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. I mean, that's as quick as many cars that I've tried that have got 160, 180 horsepower. So it's that torque figure that's important on the road, and I really enjoy that. What's it like when the going gets a little bit twisty? Well, we'll come to one of my favourite sections on this piece of road, and I'll tell you, we're in fifth now, fourth, into third, turn it in. Oh, a little bit of understeer through there. It's quite greasy. Into second. We didn't need second though, because that torque revs out and there's nothing really there. Change gear and then you can feel it coming through. It feels pretty good. It's pretty accurate. The steering is quite light, but quite like that with electric steering, because I think when they're overly heavy it just removes any kind of feel. I wouldn't say it feels any better or sportier than a regular A3, but it definitely feels like it's got a little bit of fizz around it. It's fun to push along one of your favourite roads, especially when you don't have endless performance and you have to sort of rely on carrying speed through the corners. It's really fun. We've got two 15 section tyres all round, so it does move around a bit as we experienced back there. A little bit of understeer. It's relatively cold outside and greasy, as we talked about. But yeah, I wouldn't say it's the most exciting car or hatch on the planet, but it's certainly, once again, far more exciting than you would think when you look at it on paper. What's my conclusion with this A1? Well, as you probably guessed, I've really enjoyed my time with it. If I lived near a city, near London like I used to do, and if I had to commute in and out of London and the congestion charge didn't exist and all the rest of the stuff that comes with it, I would seriously be looking at one of these, because they're very grown up when you want them to be, but they're also relative fun when you don't want them to be. I think there's a number of models to choose from. They've either got this 1 litre 3-cylinder in them, or the top spec cars have got the 1.5 litre 4-cylinder. And for my money, if I was going to spend high 20s, 30 odd grand, I would spend the extra £1,000 and have the 1.5 litre 4-cylinder, because this, with 150 horsepower and 250 newton meters of torque, with the same sort of weight, would be an absolute right. I think that would be verging on hot hatch sort of territory and fun. But that's not taking away anything from this 1 litre, because it really has got its own little personality, although you can't hear it 95% of the time. But I think if you're buying one of these on a budget, then look at the Technic, which is the entry level trim. Don't look at the base 1 litre low tune 5-speed manual that's £19,700. Look at the one up from that. I think there's one at £20,500, so it's less than £1,000 more, but it comes with a 6-speed gearbox, and it comes with this slightly higher tuned 1 litre 3-cylinder turbo. I think that would be the sweet spot if you're buying one of these on a budget. And if you had 30 grand to spend, don't get this one, spend a little bit more and get the 35 TFSI that has all of that extra power and torque. Guys, thanks a lot for watching. I'll hopefully see you at another video very soon. Cheers.